The Gemara in Yoma has a very interesting comment about Purim. Not about Chanukah, but implicitly it renders a statement about Chanukah. Gemara interprets a pasuk in Tehillim Chaf Beis, which associates the phrase Ayelas HaShachar, the launching, spurting morning, with the miracle of Purim. What does Purim have to do with dawn? Ayelas HaShachar. The Gemara concludes that Esther is Sof Kol HaNisim, that Esther was the last miracle, just like the dawn happens before the last stage of evening or of nightfall. So dawn is the end of night in the same way that Esther Sof Kol HaNisim, the Gemara says, Esther Sof Kol HaNisim. Vayika Chanukah, we're on Yom HaChavtes. Chanukah occurred hundreds of years, about 200 years after the miracle of Purim. How could you call Esther the last miracle? So the Gemara responds, I forget the exact phraseology, but Esther is not in Torah Shebechsav. Excuse me, Chanukah is not in Torah Shebechsav. Esther is the last miracle to be canonized in Torah Shebechsav and Megillas Esther. So the Gemara's statement that Esther is the last miracle has to be qualified. It's not the last miracle chronologically, it's the last nace to be inscribed and documented in Torah Shebechsav, which merely showcases and accentuates the question, why is Chanukah not incorporated or canonized in Tanakh? And of course the answer is historically, because Tanakh had already closed. And the period of Nevuah and of prophecy had already terminated towards the beginning of the second Beis HaMikdash. Esther occurs about the midpoint of the second Beis HaMikdash. What does it mean to have a miracle, to have a nace without Nevuah? A miracle or a nace of Hashgacha without incorporation into Tanakh? In many ways, the miracle of Chanukah is a preparation for the post-prophetic era, not part of the celebration of the era of prophecy and revelation. All the Yom Tovim are part of the great era of Nevuah, of Nisim, of Beis HaMikdash, and Esther is the final salvo, the final stage of that era. Chanukah happens about 200 years before the great long Galus Edom begins. And it's not part of the previous era of Nevuah. It's a prelude and an introduction to the era of Galus that would occupy 2,000 years of Jewish history. And that's why it's not incorporated in Tanakh, because Tanakh is a book that speaks about Geula and Nisim, not about Galus. And that's why it doesn't have to be incorporated into Tanakh, because it's not part of that era that Tanakh documents. It's part of the era of Galus. And it introduces some very important ingredients and tools that will ensure survival of the Jewish people throughout Galus. We wouldn't have survived 2,000 years of exile without our willingness to die al Kiddush Hashem, facing innumerable, incalculable odds, trying to crush our belief, and people weren't willing to die for their belief. Our belief would have dissipated. Our belief would have vanished. And the Chanukah episode was the first time that groups of people were willing to die al Kiddush Hashem. You can't defeat the ferocious, formidable Greek army if you're not willing to die. Elazar HaMaccabee, who speared an elephant and demonstrated to his brothers and the other soldiers that these terrifying elephants could be stilled, could be felled, committed suicide. He had to spear the elephant in the belly, knowing that the elephant would fall on him. And Chanukah was the first time that groups of people, Rabbim Biad Me'atim, were willing to die for Mesiras Nefesh al Kiddush Hashem, and that created a template which 200 years later Rabbi Akiva enshrined in the Aseret Rugei Malchus and created a sad but very powerful and valiant reality that for 2,000 years, if called upon, our religion and our eternity was more important than our life on this planet. Chanukah also leads, because of the energy that it provides, to the intellectual explosion, which we call Torah Sheba'al Peh, which happened right on the heels of Chanukah, the second part of the second Beis HaMikdash. And anytime Torah explodes, and anytime there's a Torah supernova, it's because of the national energy. You can't separate national identity and national energy from Torah study. The way we express our national pride is through Torah study, as it is today. The great propagation of Torah in our world is because of Medinas Yisrael and because of Komeniyot and because of restored Jewish pride. So it is today and so it was then. And all the heroism and pride and self-esteem and national fervor exploded into Torah Sheba'al Peh. And Torah Sheba'al Peh is responsible for our survival in Gullus. It's the secret code that allowed us to maintain a common cultural interaction without common flag or common language or common currency or common landscape, because Jews across the world, matzah is matzah and sukkah is sukkah, and mikvah is mikvah and Shabbos is Shabbos. And you can land in the middle of nowhere. You find a Jew whose skin color is different from yours and whose dialect is different in language and time zone, but you're both eating the same matzah and wearing the same tefillin. And Chanukah also is a taste of sovereignty before it's taken from us and stripped, and it reminds us of what it is to have a sovereign nation and a sovereign state with self-definition. And for some, we've forgotten that taste and we're trying to recover that taste. So Chanukah is a bundle of gifts from HaKadosh Baruch Hu to the Jewish people. Prior to this long march through the odyssey of time, it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu's preparing us for Galus. And that's why there's an interesting Gemara, Megillah, as to what parts of Purim celebration will outlast Mashiach, based on the conclusion of the 9th parak of Megillah Esther, La Yosef Mitoch Zaram, that Purim will still outlast Mashiach. When Mashiach comes, we will either celebrate Purim or at least read Megillah Esther, Machlokas Rambam and the Ravid. But no one believes that Chanukah will outlast Mashiach. When Mashiach comes, Chanukah ends. It will have served its purpose. Chanukah's function is to take us to the finish line of history and to allow us to survive Galus. Once we reach the end of Galus, Chanukah as a nace no longer is relevant in the sense that we have to maintain its performance and customs. Chag Sameach, Chanukah Sameach.